Today we're going to be making the quilted pillow, and I'm going to show you how to do it and hopefully give you some little tips along the way. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to use this pattern to cut out 5 squares of fabric A and 4 squares of fabric B. So right now I have this folded in half. You could cut this several times, but I think I'm going to fold it in half one more time so that I can get 3 out of this one cut, and then I will go back and get 2 out of the next one. Okay, so I have 5 squares of fabric A and 4 of fabric B. And just to get kind of a visual of what we're doing here is we're going to do like a checkerboard pattern when we lay it out, so that it is going to look like this when we sew it together. So when we go to pin it together to sew, we're putting right sides together, match up the edges, and pin it. And then if you want to, so that you don't get confused, you can then pin this one, again, right sides together, so that they're all ready to go. Like that. Okay, so I have all of my strips pinned together. I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which means I'm going to line up the edge of my fabric with the edge of the presser foot. So make sure that you do your back stitch. Don't run over your pins. Make sure you pull it out before you get to it. Now, this is a little trick that you can try if you want to, is you can then take your next line of fabric, and without lifting this up, this will continue to feed through, and you can just start your next one. When you get onto that next fabric, you do need to do your back stitch, and then you can keep going. And then I can take my next one and do the same thing. Then when you get to the end, you can just lift it up and pull it out. Now we've got 3 connected together, and we can just snip in between and then sew the next ones. So I just sewed the other side of each of these, and I'll snip them apart, and I have my 3 strips that I'm going to use. Now that I have my strips sewed together, I need to press these seams open. So first I'm going to just press each one to kind of melt those stitches in there and set them. And then I'm going to go back and open up the seam allowance and press those open. Flip it over, press it nice and flat. Okay, so I've sewn all 3 of my strips together. I've pressed them open so that they'll lay nice and flat and straight together. So now what I need to do is connect these 3 together here in the middle. And so the best way to do this When you're quilting, everything will line up better if you cut it straight, if you sew it straight, and then if you make sure that everything is pressed nice and neatly. When I'm lining these up, I'm not going to line them up from the end to end because they might be off a little bit, like mine are off a little bit. But to make sure that my squares line up nice and neat, I like to make sure that the seams are lined up together perfectly. And then I'll put a pin right there. Same with the next one. Make sure that your seams are lined up right. And then you can kind of make the rest of it fit together, and then your squares will be nice and square. Once I have that pinned together, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to sew it on a 1/4 inch seam allowance with the edge of the fabric right on the edge of the presser foot. Back stitching always. When you get to this seam, this is going to be doubled up, so you want to make sure that you're very careful that everything's laying nice and flat as you go over that. And then again, back stitch at the end. And we have 2 of our rows together. Then we just need to then sew these on, this one on, again, right sides together, match up your seams, and sew across. So as you can see, I sewed all 3 of my strips together. One thing to note, if you have a fabric with a pattern that's an obvious directional fabric, you might want to be very careful about which direction and check those directional fabrics to make sure that one's not sideways or upside down. This one had just got scattered flowers, and even though there is probably an obvious up and down, I thought it looked okay to just do it scattered like that. But if you have something like words or a picture of a character where you want it all facing the same direction, make sure that you do that when you lay it out. As you can see, I did a pretty good job here lining up my corners. You can see that this corner and this corner and this corner all meet really well. This one is a little bit off, but I think it'll be okay. So at this point, I want to flip it over, and I have a lot of threads that I need to trim up, which will just make the whole process a little bit smoother and neat looking. So I will trim these up. You can turn it off. Okay, so I do need to press these seams open that I just did, these long seams. So we'll do it the same way that we did the other ones. Just open them up a little bit and press. Okay, and I'll flip it over and just give it a little press from the front so it lays nice and flat. And then we have our square. So now we're gonna make the back of our pillow. So I picked a fabric that I want to use for the back. It doesn't have to be the same as the front, it can be completely different, but I just like the way that it matches. So you're gonna use your quilted top that you just made as the pattern for the back. So you're going to lay it on the fabric as close to the edges as you can so that you're not wasting a lot of fabric. And then you'll just pin it down just like you would any other pattern. and then cut it out. So now that we have the bottom and the top pinned together, right sides together, so you should have the wrong side on the outside, we're going to sew these together. We're going to leave a little space open where we can stuff it, and I usually feel like about 1 square is adequate, but we're going to use our pivot as we go around to sew the back to the front. So I'm going to start at the end of my opening. We're still going to use our 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I'm going to start right on that seam right there. And then back stitch, and we get where we're going to make our pivot. Now this one you're going to have to go a little bit farther than the 5/8 because we're doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So then you'll pick up your presser foot, pivot, and if you can see, I didn't estimate it quite right. So this is too far. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to put this down and I'm going to take a couple more stitches, maybe one more, and then I can check it again and see if it's right, and it's right on the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So before you mess up and try and zigzag and make it right, you can always, if it's not quite lining up, you can always go back, take another stitch, and go again. So that's one way you can check it. Just want to make sure that seam allowance is underneath the presser foot so it doesn't get wadded up in there. Again, I didn't guess it quite right, so I'm going to go back and take one more stitch, and hopefully that'll be better. It is. Nope, thought I had that one. Now, this is where I'm going to end. Make sure that you don't go all the way to the end or you won't have an opening to stuff your pillow. So I'm going to end right there, do a back stitch, and pull it out. And there we have the front and the back together. One other little tip that is not in the instructions but is really important when you're making pivots is if you want to have a nice sharp corner when you turn this right side out, you're going to want to clip the corners. And when I say clip the corners, you're going to make sure you do not cut your stitching, but you're just going to get close to it and just cut diagonally across there like that. And what that does is it takes some of that bulk out so that when you turn it right side out, it doesn't look so wadded up in there. So I'm going to go around and I'm going to just clip my corners. Again, if you cut your stitching, then you will have a hole and you don't want that. But you just want to get it closer and take out a little bit of that bulk in there. Then what I can do is turn my project right side out. Just kind of shove it through there. Pull it right side out. And then you can go through and poke your corners out. And one thing that will also help get your corners nice and neat is if you take your corner like this, and you can see it's kind of wadded up and rounded right there. But if I kind of take it and just rub it between my thumb and forefinger like that, you can make it come to a sharper point. And we do grade the corners, so you want to make sure your corner's nice and sharp if you can. So I've stuffed my pillow. I've tried to work it out into the corners, and it's the amount of fluffiness that I want. I'm going to stitch up this hole right now, and we're going to have to hand stitch this. So the important thing to do here is try and tuck these in so that they are even with that 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I like to, once I get it lined up, pin it so that it stays. It's going to be easier to hand, so I won't have to be fighting it as I'm stitching. So we'll pin up this hole. Tucking those raw edges inside. Okay, so then I'm going to take my needle and thread, and I do have this doubled. I have a knot in the end, and I'm going to do the invisible stitch. So the easiest way to do this to start out is to go in between those two sides and come up through the top edge. And I'm going to do that so that I can tuck that knot down inside and we won't even see it. Then I'm going to take this out so you can see a little better. I'm going to go straight across. So I came out here, I'm going to go straight across to the other side of the fabric, and I'm going to go up through the middle of that fold on the other side and come out. And then I'm going to go straight across and come in this side. Not all the way through, but I'm going to go through the top fold. Okay, so I've stitched up this hole with the invisible stitch, and to tie it off, I'm going to take a little stitch through the top here. And then through the loop, make a little knot, and then I'm going to do that again. And tie it off. And then a little trick to not see the end is then to go down through there, and you can come out through your fabric here, and then you're just going to cut it off, and it'll actually suck back into the pillow. You won't even see it, but now your knot doesn't show either, and you have your pillow.